Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm thrilled to welcome to the podcast today Sophia Ciminello and Nick Ruhrkraut to this very special episode of Film at 50. How are the two of you doing?
Doing well. I am so excited to be here today and to talk about a great start to my favorite decade in film and a really exciting Oscar ceremony.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for having us here, Brian. I'm excited. You know, our podcast always focused on the Oscars. So this was a year for me that I hadn't really touched on before. So I'm excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason I did this podcast, Film at 50, was that I love the films of the 1970s, one of my favorite decades for sure. And there's so many movies from that decade I have not seen. I was born after the 70s, right? So all of these films I've had to discover later. And, you know, being able to kind of wrap up the year with this kind of, it's like almost like a season finale in a way. I felt like I needed a bridge of some kind between talking about the films of 70 and 71. To just go straight into 71 didn't feel right. I wanted to have like a final episode. So to have both of you on here today is a huge thrill. I've been listening to your podcast, Oscar Wilde, for many months. Fantastic job. I really enjoy it. As an Oscar buff, it's pure heaven for me. So I thought we could get us started today. Both of you could just talk about, you know, how did you get into film? How did you get passionate about the Oscars? Where did that come from?
Yeah, so I got into the Oscars as a young child. My parents were both really into film and into the Oscars. When I was a baby, they actually put my crib in the living room so that I could watch the Oscars with them, which is so wild to think about now. And we would just kind of, as I grew up, would keep track of our ballots and who we thought would win. And I think that's also how I was interested early on in the films of the 70s and of the 80s, because those were the ones that my parents grew up with and those big Oscar ones that they really enjoyed. And now since I've been following the races more closely, I've just gotten into, I think, appreciating the intricacies of the film industry and of how award ceremonies work and how you can learn about film history by using the Oscars as a lens to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Nick?
I really got into the Oscars in high school and then into college. This was probably the late 2000s. Once I started realizing that films were being nominated and these were the films that I was liking more and more, I was like, okay, really have to check these out. So then I started seeing all the Best Picture nominees and just getting more involved. And I think every year I've done more and more with the Oscars, with predicting and, you know, just trying to challenge myself to see every single nominee of the year. And I've loved it so much. And I think, you know, with this podcast and guesting on yours, I've pushed myself to see more. And like Sophia said, learn about the film history and the ceremonies and the drama and how things really developed from, I mean, we discussed Mank and how MPAS was formed, which I had no idea about. So from that beginning until now, there's just so much that has happened. And it's really fun to discuss with other people who know or even don't know about all of it.
Yeah, I think what's fun about the Oscars is that you can just look forward, right? You can just look at the films now. Okay, what's going to win? What's going to get nominated? Nick, you're pretty good at that, right?
Pressure,
Nick did okay at Gold Derby last year. You know, 24 out of 24. We can maybe 25 out of 24 next time. Yeah. So I have not done as well as you, Nick, but I'm trying to get better. But what's great about it is you can also look back at Oscar history. There's so much rich material, you know, for films, you know, just to kind of learn. And it's a great way for people who might not know where to start in any given year, in any given decade. What's really great is that you can start with the Oscar nominations and the wins, right? That's a great way to kind of start feeling out what movies you might want to watch in, in classic decades, going all the way back to the late 1920s. When the Oscar ceremony started. We're coming up on 100 years.
Almost 100,
Yeah, which is crazy. That's going to be a crazy year when it's 100. Yeah, my first Oscar ceremony I remember watching was the one Whoopi Goldberg hosted in '94, the year that Schindler's List won. I was too young. I hadn't seen Schindler's List, but I had seen Jurassic Park, and I was starting to kind of put the pieces together. Like, oh, okay, so Jurassic Park doesn't get Best Picture, but the director's other movie gets it. And so by that year, I was really into movies, and I don't think I've missed a ceremony since. And I have a lot of friends who make fun of me because I know all the dates, and I know a lot of the nominations and the years and everything. I have to tell you guys a quick story. When I was in college, I was a sophomore in college. I was taking this class on public speaking, and the professor, I remember it was a big group. It was 40, 45 students. It was a big class. And the professor was trying to show us well, a year from now, if your public speaking engagement doesn't go well, nobody's going to remember. Things that are really exciting and big today, people don't remember. And so his example was, he said, for example, could anyone in the class tell me who has won Best Actress at the Academy Awards for the last 5 years? And he took 1 second. He was point proven. And then I'm doing this in the back. I'm raising my hand. And he says, yes. I said, well, I can. Hilary Swank, $1 Million Baby, Charlize Theron for Monster, Nicole Kidman for The Hours, Halle Berry for Monsters Ball, and Julia Roberts for Aaron Brockovich. And I'll never forget what he said. He went, "Are you shitting me?" And it probably didn't look cool for me to do that in front of all these other students. But I was very happy with myself that I was like, nope, people will remember, Professor. If I screw up this public speaking engagement, it's going to be bad, So, coming to this conversation with the two of you who are such experts and, you love the Oscars, such a huge thrill. I did want to ask you before we get started, do you prefer to call it the Oscars or the Academy Awards, Sophia?
I have always called them the Oscars. It's just what I generally say. And I think now with the title of our podcast being Oscar Wild, I'm even more inclined to always call them the Oscars.
You didn't want to call it
Academy Awards is fine too.
Academy Award Wild wouldn't have had the same. So are you the same way? Are you the same way, Nick? Do you call it the Oscars?
I mix it up. And I think in kind of the same way I do film and movie.
Exactly.
Those terms, right? I just kind of, whenever I'm using them in, together in a paragraph or multiple sentences, I guess I'll switch it up. But to me, they're the same.
They're the same, right? Okay, because I sometimes feel like now, I feel like in the 90s, they called it the Academy Awards, when they would announce the ceremony. And now it's almost always Oscars, right? Because they know by now, everybody knows what that means.
Yeah.
Right?
It's the cooler name, maybe.
Yeah. We'll get a younger fan base in for the next telecast.
Yeah.
But
they tried to get that.
That's a good, they try, right? But that's a good point with movie and film. They're kind of interchangeable to me too. Technically, Schindler's List would be the film, right? Mm-hmm. And then Jurassic Park would be the movie. But they kind of mean the same thing. I don't really think too deeply about it, especially if you're writing a review or something to just say movie all the way down the page. It just gets monotonous, so you have to mix it up.
Yeah, exactly.
Call it motion picture. All right, so to get started, I wanted to start today. Again, to our audience, this is going to be a little bit different. Usually on the podcast, we talk about a film and then maybe the career of an actor or director. Because today is kind of the culmination of the last 20 plus episodes talking about the films of 1970, I wanted this to be kind of like a season finale of sorts, touching on a few different things. I'm going to start by talking about the top 10 box office hits of 1970. Some surprises in here for sure. And it does not look like a typical year of a top 10 list, of the box office where, you have a lot of sequels and remakes and things like that. This is 1970, so it's very different. I did want to mention the Golden Globes just briefly, or is that are you guys I'm out of here?
No, the Golden Globes are super interesting this year. So yeah, please do.
Okay, cool. And then that'll just be brief. And then the centerpiece of our conversation will be the Oscar ceremony, of course. And then I'm going to end with my 10 favorite films of 1970. Since January, I have looked at about 75 films released in 1970, some of which I'd seen before. But I would say probably 60 of them I had not seen before. So I'm just going to, at the end, just, for those listeners who've been following me these last few months who haven't, these are the best films I watched in 2020 for 1970. And if either of you have any favorites of the year, feel free to chime in. All right, so the top 10 films of 1970. Number 10 was The Owl and the Pussycats. starring Barbara Streisand and George Siegel, a romantic comedy. That made $11.5 million. And, it's obviously different looking at the films of 1970. I don't think 11.5 million would make it into the top, 100 today? Maybe not in 2020, but previous years, right? I'd be curious to know, if your film makes $11 million now, where are you on the list, right? Catch 22, the film by Mike Nichols, made 12.3 million. That was number 9. Ryan's Daughter was number 8 with 13.4 million. That's a really rough movie that you will not find on my top 10 of the year. Oh boy, 3 hours long. It was 3.5 hours long. My guest was not happy with me. We did an episode of that in November, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I'll look at that. Interesting director, interesting cast." And then the night before, he texts me. He's like, "It's 3.5 hours long." I thought he was gonna bail. Yeah. And I was like, when I got on the next day, and he's like, "I watched it." I'm like, "Oh, good, okay, I can record." Yeah. Tora was number 7. The war film made 13.7 million. Have you heard of that movie? It's one of probably the more known films of 1970. I watched it. It was okay.
Big war movie. Yeah.
I was considering doing an episode on that at the end of September, but I just didn't take to the movie well enough.
It's a big year for war movies.
Yeah, right. I mean, the early 70s. I mean, you look at Clint Eastwood's career around now. It's 2 movies a year, and a lot of them are war films. Kelly's Heroes and things like that. Little Big Man was number 6, which made around $15 million. That's the Dustin Hoffman movie, which we'll talk about in the Oscar section. He is extraordinary in this movie. It came out at the end of December, and he did not get nominated for the Best Actor Oscar, which kind of surprises me. For this time period when he got nominated for Midnight Cowboy, he got nominated for The Graduate. I mean, maybe it was just Dustin Hoffman overload, and they were like, "We can skip this year." I don't know. Woodstock, 3-hour documentary, number 5 with 16 million. That's pretty extraordinary for
it's a big one. Yeah.
1970, a documentary to make that much money, right? So that's pretty cool. I finally got to watch it a few months ago. It was on Turner Classic Movies, and it's a long watch, but really interesting. Very long. Patton was number 4 with 27 million. MASH was number 3 with 30 million. Airport was number 2 with 44.5 million. That many people saw Airport.
Oh.
Okay, which
we can
get
into that.
Oh, yeah. We will get into it for sure. And then, does either of you know what was the number 1 movie of 1970?
Love Story.
I'm looking at it.
Love Story.
Yeah.
Which on Wikipedia here it says it made 50 million, but on IMDb it says it made 106. So I'm wondering, did it make 50 million on its first run, and then it made the other 56 being in re-release? I don't know. Was it one of those is wrong? They're pretty far off.
It's crazy how much this made. And this is still, I looked up, this is number 41 on the all-time highest grossing film list, adjusted for inflation.
Adjusted for inflation, yeah. Which
crazy.
Gone with the Wind is number 1, right? For inflation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's still number 1, I believe.
Yeah. So, Gone with the Wind, 1939, 1940. I can't even imagine how many people were watching that. But yeah, we talked about this just on a recent episode on Love Story of it's this kind of quiet, intimate romance drama where not a whole lot happens till the last half hour. $100 million, the biggest movie of the year. Why do we think that happened? People were just in the mood for a really sad, weepy love story movie.
I personally have never gotten the hype around Love Story.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work for me as well as the other movies that were nominated. And even some of the other, I think if you're looking at the box office, those movies, I think a big thing really is just a lot of times people do want kind of a cheesy romance. I think Ally McGraw really works in this movie. And I think too, just they're both so the preppy setting in the fall. I think people just maybe wanted something like that. And it's something that I think a majority of people despite it being weepy, it's not a tough movie to sit through.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's easy to make money on that.
Yeah, it's short enough. They can play it a lot throughout the day. And I think it was one of those movies. It just kind of appealed to everybody, right? I can see it appealing to younger viewers. It's kind of a young cast, right? Ryan O'Neal and Ally McGraw, younger couple, but then, older audiences were coming to it. And, I just talked to my mom about it a couple days ago, and she's like, it was one of the first films she saw in the theater, and she was 13, 14 at the time. So, people of all ages were coming to see that one. Yeah, for sure. All right, so that's the top 10 list of the year. Now I wanted to touch on the Golden Globes, which do not necessarily overlap very much with the Oscars. Whereas now, was it 2019, the year the last one, right? Where all four of the winners of the acting categories, it was like the same at the Golden Globes than it was again at the Oscars, right? So that happens a lot more these days. Whereas decades ago we'd have a lot of different winners, and that was definitely the case this year for the Golden Globes. So I'm not going to touch on all the categories. I did want to mention the winners of New Star of the Year. For male, it was James Earl Jones for The Great White Hope, which is a really solid film. I did that. That was one of my first episodes for the podcast. And Carrie Snodgrass for Diary of a Mad Housewife won New Star of the Year for actress. I feel like it's a really strong film, Diary of a Mad Housewife. It's not a movie a lot of people know about now, but I guess it was kind of big back in the day. It got nominated for things, and I don't know if either of you have heard of that one.
A lot of these movies I hadn't heard about before prepping for this podcast.
You're like, oh, okay, news to me. Golden Globe director. This is crazy to me. The winner of the director of the Golden Globe was Arthur Hiller for Love Story. Who watches Love Story and says, the directing job? Wow. Why? Do you think it was just the love for the movie that got Arthur Hiller the award there? Has to be, right?
I think it had to have been, yeah, because, and we'll get to the Oscars and how everything was kind of slated to win before the award ceremony even happened. So, I mean, I would definitely say that's a Golden Globe kind of thing to do, is to award that and the Oscars be totally different.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you do see that. I mean, it's not like, the biggest movie gets director every year at the Golden Globes. I mean, like Richard Linklater won for Boyhood. That's kind of a quiet film, and that won the Golden Globe for director. It seems like the Academy Awards, they go for usually the directing job goes for a little bit bigger film. They wouldn't pick like a quiet love story for director, right?
And last year too was, I'm assuming 1917 one for director, and then Bong Joon-ho obviously won the Oscar. So maybe a little off the beaten path.
Because Parasite definitely a smaller film than 1917 was. Mm-hmm. And I still don't know how you predicted that one, Nick. I was like, Sam Mendes is winning director. I think Parasite might get picture. I was
right there with you.
Like Mendes won like everything. I was like, how did this happen? This is crazy.
Yep.
Let's give Bong Joon. Let's give him, 4 Oscars in one night. I love it. Screenplay at the Golden Globes also went to Love Story. So this was just a love story, love fest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Although poor Ryan O'Neal did not get the Golden Globe for Best Actor. I bet he's still upset about this today. Supporting actor went to John Mills for Ryan's Daughter, which will overlap, as we will see. Supporting actress is kind of interesting at the Golden Globes. It's a tie between Karen Black for 5 Easy Pieces. She is so great in 5 Easy Pieces. And Maureen Stapleton for Airport, which is interesting because the winner for supporting actress at the Oscars, as we will see, is for Airport, but it's not the same person.
Mm-hmm.
But Maureen Stapleton will be nominated for the Oscar, so Maureen's got to be pissed. At the Oscar ceremony, what is happening right now?
Well, it was, I just read, sorry, not to cut you off, but I had read that I think a producer of, was it?
Oh, did someone get involved in
well, it was the producer was rooting for Helen Hayes to win the Oscar. So he had supported her through luncheons and whatnot. And then he ended up apologizing to Maureen when they were both
Oh,
nominated.
okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
This is one of the producers of Airport, the film.
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Yeah, because
I'll
I
find it
feel
and
like
come back.
something had to happen there. Helen Hayes is not even nominated at the Golden Globes, right? Sally Kellerman for MASH, Lee Grant for The Landlord, which is a great performance. I don't know if any of you have seen The Landlord,
Mm-hmm.
and Tina Shen for The Hawaiians. There is no Helen Hayes at the Golden Globes, so something happened there. Like between that ceremony and the Oscars, someone said, "Hey, what about Helen?" Who is actually, I think, one of the best parts of Airport. Like she kind of gives it a little bit of life at times.
Mm-hmm.
So best performance in a comedy or musical, Albert Finney in Scrooge won. And this is crazy to me that Albert Finney did not get an Oscar nomination. I really enjoyed him in Scrooge. Has either of you seen the movie Scrooge?
I actually have seen this one.
Okay.
And I agree with you. I feel like this would be kind of a typical Oscar thing to do here, to nominate Albert Finney for this role. So I'm also surprised.
Yeah.
Looking at the comedy musical actor performances too, I love how we have, well, we'll get to MASH and how I feel about it, but
Yeah.
with Elliot Gould and Donald Sutherland here, I'm guessing that they probably split the votes,
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of gave Albert Finney a clearer path to a win. But it's even more surprising then that even with the Globe win, that he wasn't nominated for the Oscar.
Yeah, I'm looking here. I don't think any of these five actors got an Oscar nomination. Finney, Richard Benjamin for Diary of a Mad Housewife, Elliot Gould and Donald Sutherland for MASH, and Jack Lemmon for The Out-of-Towners. And this happens some years, right? At the Golden Globes, like none of the five in that category make it to the Oscars. This was one of those years. So yeah, I think of these five, probably the one that had the best shot was Albert Finney. But I did an episode with Alonso Duralde on the podcast a few weeks ago about Scrooge, and I guess the movie just wasn't as popular as the studio and others were thinking it would be. I think if the movie had made more money, maybe he would have gotten in. I don't know. I remember it was just a strong year for dramatic performances, and there just wasn't room. Sometimes that happens too. All right, so let's see. Actress went to Carrie Snodgrass for Diary of a Mad Housewife. She beat out Julie Andrews, Sally Dennis, Angela Lansbury, and Barbara Streisand. That's kind of crazy. Like this newcomer in this small drama.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, Diary of a Mad Housewife, if you look it up, I mean, it's not, a movie that's easily accessible in any way, but it was a thing back in the day for sure. And then performance in a drama, we have George C. Scott winning for Patton. That's going to overlap, right? I don't know how. I feel like Jack Nicholson maybe would have had the best shot at beating him for that. But these other ones, I mean, or Ryan O'Neal, because of everyone's obsession with Love Story. Give it everything, But yeah, I think they made the right choice there with George C. Scott. And then actress went to Ally McGraw for Love Story, which makes sense to me. Like if you're gonna reward one of those two, I feel like Ally McGraw is the one you give it to, right?
Definitely.
Would you agree?
For sure.
So yeah. And then motion picture of the year, comedy or musical, went to MASH, which is an excellent choice. And drama did not go to Patton. It went to Love Story, which kind of is amazing to me. Oh, those wacky Golden Globe, Hollywood Foreign Press journalists, whoever. Do we know who these people are?
I think that's kind of the running joke, really. Like no one knows who
It's
these
probably
people
just
are.
it's probably just one guy in his basement, right? I will go with this one. But it's one of those shows that's been around forever. When I was getting into the Oscars in the 90s, I would always watch the Golden Globes first, and it was always kind of like the start of award season, so it was really fun in that regard, and you could kind of get a taste of like, oh, okay, what did people like the previous year, and what might be nominated for the Oscar. So I've always really enjoyed that it's there, but it also doesn't, mean as much as the main show, right?
Do you look at the television side of them too, or not really?
You mean just like today, like when I'm watching?
Well, with the Globes, because they're TV and film, and more so, TV would be Emmys and then film would be Oscars.
Right.
Do you focus on both parts, or?
Well, it's a little different, right? Because the Emmys usually come first, right? Usually, like, the Emmys is weird, isn't it? Like June to May or something like that. Like
The submission times are off, and I
yeah,
don't really understand the difference there.
yeah. I think if your show premieres like between January and May, you're then up. You can get nominated for that September's telecast, and then that next January, sometimes you'll see some repeat wins and
Hmm.
nominations, but then you'll have like a new show that just premiered in
Right.
November, December,
Right.
and then the January Golden Globes will give that a big award, and so that will not have been a part of the previous Emmy. So but yeah, I love the TV awards too, and the Emmys, and I love it all. Like if it's storytelling, if it's film, if it's TV, I'm all in. But the Oscars are my favorite. I'm assuming
Hmm.
it's the same case for you. The Emmys, I'm not like sitting there like, I like when I'm watching the Oscars and I'm invested and I've seen all the films and I've got my favorites and I'm like on the edge of my seat,
Like,
like I'm
don't
watching
talk
a
to me. I
thriller.
gotta watch.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I'll go to my parents' house and they'll like, be making dinner and I'll have my nephews over and they're trying to like play games. I'm like, go away, I will have dinner later. And my dad's in the corner like, Brian, they're doing best production design. And I'm shut up. Let me watch the show. But then if you watch it by yourself, it's not very fun. So it's kind of like you
Right.
always have to find like the
The
right
right
group to watch
people.
it
Yep.
with,
You do, yeah.
you know. Because I did watch it. There was a year where we had a huge snowstorm in the last 5 years, and I found myself watching it at home by myself. So I was doing the Twitter thing, right? Like, oh, I'm a part of the conversation on Twitter,
Hmm.
but it's not the same.
Mhm.
All right, so that's the Golden Globes. Anything else we want to mention about that? Forgot to look up when that like actually happened because the Oscars in 1971 they didn't take place until April 15th, which is kind of crazy. Can you imagine? Well, I guess
This
we
year.
can, right? Because this year we're
Yeah.
getting in a typical year, right? We usually get them in February. The last one was what, February 7th or 9th or something crazy like that?
9th. Yeah.
February 9th.
Mhm.
So yeah, now it's different because we're including films of January and February. And so I'm still kind of curious how that's like, do we know of any big films that are dropping in January, February that aren't out yet that could be contenders?
There are plenty.
There's going to be
Let
plenty.
me tell you.
Okay. Like are people dropping films on like February 28th? Like
There is one.
Oh, there
Do you
is.
know what it is, Sophia? There is one really late in February. And I just looked it up and I
cannot
don't remember.
I think the interesting thing, so I know Nomadland, it's like real release to everyone will be in February
Okay.
now. And I think another thing that we talked about a while back on our pod was about how Sundance now this year could sneak into this upcoming
Right.
Oscar eligibility
Yeah.
window. Yeah,
Interesting.
I think a hard part too is that in a normal year, films that win critics awards can kind of ride that hype
Mhm.
sometimes into the industry awards and into the Golden Globes and the Oscars. But this year, there will be such a lag between a lot of those. We already have our New
Mhm.
York and LA film critics winners, and now we
Yeah.
just have to wait for months until we get the Oscars. So it'll be interesting for sure.
Yeah, it's weird because that part's staying the same. We're getting the critics awards right now, but then aren't there going to be films that could be nominated in April that will not be on their list because they're opening in January, February? Kind of interesting.
Right.
Something new.
I think the big one that I know Gold Derby has been predicting, or at least in their lists and forums, is the United States versus Billie Holiday,
Okay.
which is supposed to be a really big movie coming out in February.
Mm-hmm.
And then also everybody's talking about Jamie, which was a big like musical talk that Disney had said is being released in February as well. So those are two like
Okay.
super late additions. Maybe not for. I mean, United States versus Billie Holiday maybe for a top prize, but
Mm-hmm.
we really don't know much about it. So it's kind of like we just have to wait and see if it's really going to shake up the conversation.
Do we know when the Golden Globes are airing? Are they in March? Are they earlier than that? I'd be curious to know.
I think they're earlier.
Because I feel like, I mean, they're usually very early on, right? What was the one last January wasn't it like January 6th? It was like really early. It was like the first weekend after like New Year's weekend. So I assume the Golden Globes will be like right there at the cusp of like when the final films have dropped. which is kind of similar
Yeah.
to every year. But yeah, it's gonna be weird. Like in 10 years, 20 years, you're gonna have to remember, oh, a couple of the winners came out in 2021. That's gonna be kind of weird to like if I had to go back for 50 years ago, I have to also look at January and February of 71. Like that would get kind of confusing. So nice going. No, it's all
I'm
good.
trying
It's
to
been a
finish
stranger.
up all of my like top of 2020 list, and
Yeah.
it really can't happen, but I'm doing my best to like try to see everything now and then be like, wait, am I gonna include stuff from January, February or not? And
Yeah,
still
like
don't know
like
how
it-
that's
like
gonna go.
like an updated list in like
Yeah.
March 1st or something. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But yeah, 50 years ago, and I have a poster from the 80s. There, like a lot of the ceremonies would take place in mid to late April, which is crazy to me. Like I remember when they were in March, right? We were like for a while it was like March 20th for many years around then. And then what in the last 15 or so years, it's been February or very early March. So they get like the windows get tighter every year. The 1971 ceremony took place on April 15th, 1971 at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion. The show was produced by Robert Wise, the great director of West Side Story and The Sound of Music and The Haunting and so many great classic films, produced the ceremony. I don't know how many he did. And it was directed by Richard Dunlap. Let's see. Hosting duties this year were handled by 34 Friends of Oscar. And the show was broadcast by NBC for the first time in 11 years. Should they do that again, do you think? Have 34 Friends of Oscar host the show? I mean, I guess they kind of have like... What was that? Was it the previous year that they didn't have a host? Like, I guess they kind of did that. But
Yeah. Past 2
years, have they not had a host?
was it?
I think just the past year. So
Just
this was
last
our
year? Okay.
first year where we didn't have a host. And
Okay. What do we think? Do we prefer a host or not? Doesn't matter.
I don't need the opening number always. Like it's not something I'm one of those people who's like, okay, let's get to the awards. Like, let's see the speeches. I don't need the musical interludes. I do like a montage here and there.
Yeah.
But sometimes I think the bits that the hosts, at least recently, have tried to do have kind of been crash and burn moments for me as a viewer.
When there's always that talk, right, of like, let's keep the show short, but then they'll have like an hour of all these different segments for comedy relief. That's like, what? And then we have to cut some of the speeches because we're going along, and you're like, wait,
Yeah.
they just did a 20-minute comedy bit. This isn't fair, right? All right. So before we get to the categories, I did want to touch on a couple, kind of big trivia. I mean, obviously the big story of this ceremony has to do with George C. Scott. What do we know about that? If either of you wants to share that with us.
George
C. Scott.
He had denied his Oscar previously, and I don't know the year. Was that the year before?
Oh, did he win before 1970? I thought this was his first win.
So this was his first win, but he rejected another nomination before.
Okay.
So he rejects nominations too.
Yeah.
And then, so here's the case of a year where Goldie Hawn comes out on stage and she announces George C. Scott for Patton is the winner. But he rejected it. And it says, I think on Wikipedia, like it actually says like, winner, George C. Scott, Patton, rejected. No thanks, but they don't give it to someone else.
I think it was the day nominations closed. Then he said he wasn't accepting an Oscar if he won. And the Academy was pissed. Apparently they like sent telegrams to people, celebrating their nominations once they were announced, and he didn't get one that day. And then people had applauded him at the time. I know I love having my little Oscar book.
And I've got mine.
And then he won, obviously, and rejected. Yeah.
For those of you who are just listening, I've got my book here with Julia and Russell, Benicio and Marcia. They're looking so happy. John Harkness, the Academy Awards Handbook. I've had this for almost 20 years.
It's a great one. And
really
George
easy to
C.
read.
Scott, Yeah, and George C. Scott too. I read that he did accept the New York Film Critics Circle Award for
Oh,
Patton.
Mhm.
He was
okay.
fine with that, but he called the Oscars, quote, a goddamn meat parade, which
Yeah.
Yeah, he called it a 2-hour meat parade, a public display with contrived suspense for economic reasons. So I forgot to look up his like I'm assuming he got more nominations after Patton. I mean, I think he was nominated a few more times, or was it just this? Like I don't know if he rejected every nomination for any show he ever got nominated for. Like, wasn't he acting into the 90s and he got probably Emmy nominations, Golden Globe? He just never showed.
I guess not.
You know, pulling a Joe Pesci like the last year. I don't need to go to that. Right. So that was really interesting. So I didn't know that. So they actually knew when they were voting, like weeks before the ceremony, they knew that he was going to reject it. It was not a surprise on the day.
Yeah.
Okay. So you'd think they would have been behind the scenes, like, how do we arrange this where someone else gets it? Someone give it to Ryan O'Neal. He'll be there.
I know. Yeah.
Oof. He would have loved that.
Oh yeah, his only nomination, right? Ryan O'Neal's only nom. He was in there. He was in the. Come on, this is it. It's like Cuba Gooding Jr. Like, this is gonna be the only chance. Ryan O'Neal would go on to do a really solid performance in Barry Lyndon by Stanley Kubrick, but this would be his only nomination, as we'll get to. All right. Anything else on George C. Scott? Yeah, that's such an interesting case. I mean, we would get again 2 years later with Marlon Brando for The Godfather, which is another famous story, him not showing up. But it doesn't happen very much. I want to say Dustin Hoffman was kind of anti-Oscars for many, many, many years. When he finally won for Kramer versus Kramer, he accepted it. He was kind of like mixed about it. If you've seen that speech on stage, he's like, I have mixed feelings up here. But he still took it home. He came back for Rain Man, and he got over it. But George C. Scott is one of the first instances. Yeah.
So another one, and you mentioned previously how Carrie Snodgrass won at the Golden Globes, and she had a conversation with Robert Weiss, who had called him hours before the ceremony and said she wasn't coming. And he was like, well, why did you go to the Golden Globes? And she was like, I thought I had to accept her award for Best Newcomer. So she didn't show up either. Just people didn't really care to go to these awards. Crazy.
It is so funny when you look back at, like, if you watch past ceremonies, how many people just are not there in any given year, especially the ones that are a long time ago. It's so wild to me.
Yeah, in the 70s, I mean, they have the clips online on YouTube and stuff, and there'll be some categories where one or two of them are there, and then the other one's just like a stock photo of like who was it who didn't go for a while? Was it Al Pacino? I want to say, like he didn't go for many of that. Like if you look at his all of his noms for 70, like he didn't show up. Like I think he went to the first one and then, but he showed up for the one he did win for A Scent of a Woman. But a lot of them he didn't show up. One of my favorites is go watch Jamie Lee Curtis winning Best Actress in a Comedy for True Lies at the Golden Globes, and it announces the nominees are Jamie Lee Curtis for True Lies, and she's like, woo, she's in the audience, and then it names 4 other women, and it's all just stock photo. Like they didn't bother. They're good. You know, the Golden Globes are interesting, right? Because we had, like, I feel like the last 20, 25 years, it's become a little bit more important. They show up more. Like, I don't think Meryl Streep really went to the Golden Globes in the 80s. Like, maybe a couple, but she wasn't there every year. But now she gets nominated for Taking a Breath, and she's in the room.
And I bet she'll be there this year again.
Yeah. Is she going to get, she'll be nominated for The Prom, right? For actress in a comedy musical. I thought she did great. I thought she was great in Let Them All Talk, but it's not a showy role, so it's probably going to be The Prom. Yeah. All right. So a few more things about the Oscars. With her Best Supporting Actress win for Airport, Helen Hayes became the first performer to win Oscars in both lead and supporting, having won Best Actress 38 years before for a movie called The Sin of Madeleine Claudette, a movie I'd never heard of until just yesterday doing my research. She also has the record of having the biggest gap between acting wins. Well, I guess that stands to this day. That's kind of interesting. Good on you, Helen.
Yeah. I know there have been some that come up like every year, and I can't think of the examples now, but I know that is a stat when you do have older actors who you think they might get nominated. It's like that could be a record that could be broken. But yeah, I think Helen Hayes does still have it.
That's pretty extraordinary. I mean, one of my favorites is Piper Laurie was nominated in 1961 for The Hustler. She didn't act in film for 15 years, came back, did Carrie for Brian De Palma, and got nominated again. That's one of my favorite statistics.
What a comeback, too.
15 years, no films, come back, and then you get nominated again. That's something that's pretty extraordinary.
I mean, Pesci came close too, right? That was almost 30 years.
Yeah, let's see. Pesci retired semi-retired after Lethal Weapon 4, which would have been 1998. one of the finest performances ever on film, Lethal Weapon 4. And then he had a small part in The Good Shepherd in 2006, and he had a lead role in Love Ranch in 2010 with Helen Mirren. Why I know this, I don't know.
I was just going to say, wow.
That's some deep history, yeah.
Well, Love Ranch was shot in Reno, and that's my hometown. That's where I live now. So I kind of followed that production a little bit. But yeah, his first real standout role in a big film would be The Irishman. So that would have been more than 20 years, right? So that was a long time coming too. I didn't think we were going to see him again in a movie. I thought he was done. So to at least get that performance, I feel really lucky that we got to have that.
Definitely.
The documentary film Woodstock garnered 3 Oscar nominations, making it the most nominated documentary film in Oscar history, which I also think does that stand up to this day? I mean, Hoop Dreams should have been nominated for 8 things, but it didn't get.
Yeah. Hoop Dreams should have maybe won Best Picture, but
yeah. Have you seen that those segments with Siskel and Ebert for a year on their show? They're just championing. They're saying all these great things about Hoop Dreams, best film of the year, best film of the decade. And then it doesn't get a best documentary nomination.
No, yeah. And it got best editing. So we covered the 94 Oscars.
That's right. It's a great episode. Yeah.
And definitely that was one, just seeing Hoop Dreams there. I was like, oh, more people need to watch this movie because it really is just tremendous.
Oh, it's so good. Yeah, get the Criterion DVD or Blu-ray. It's such an extraordinary film. But yeah, Woodstock got 3 nominations, so that's really cool. And then this was the only time since the 6th Academy Awards that all 5 nominees for Best Actress were first-time nominees. So that's kind of cool, right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Have we seen that? I want to say the year that Julianne Moore won for Still Alice, weren't the other 4 first-time nominees? I want to say that was what, 2014? And then Julianne Moore, of course, had been nominated a bunch of times before that. But I feel like to get a category where it's 5 first-timers, that's pretty rare, right? Mm-hmm. Usually it's the opposite, right? Usually it's supporting actor of this last year where we had Pacino and Pesci and Hanks and Pitt, the same people who've been nominated before. Usually it's the other way. So that's all the kind of the trivia I have on the ceremony. Did either of you find anything else in your research that you thought was interesting to share before we get to the categories?
I think most of mine was just film specific, but one thing I'm really curious about that I'm thinking about that I found when I was watching the ceremony on YouTube. So they show Ally McGraw with her husband at the time, who's Robert Evans, the famed studio head of Paramount. And I'm wondering if he had anything to do with this love story phenomenon. So maybe box office, but then also with awards. And it didn't quite pan out at the Oscars, but it did get quite a few nominations. And I think part of that, of course, is because it is just this huge story of box office success and it couldn't be ignored. But the other part of it, I do wonder if he had anything to do with it.
That's a good point. We did talk about on that episode about how the screenwriter of the film, he first wrote the screenplay, they bought the script, and then to drum up interest for the movie, they had him write a novel version, which came out a year before the film did. And all throughout 1970, everybody and their grandma was reading the book. Right. So when they got to December of 70, everybody flocked to the movie. So that was actually a ploy that worked. And it got, obviously made it the biggest movie of the year. I wonder, if it had come out in the summer, if it had, it came out right at the end of December, maybe it was one of those cases where it came out almost too late to get the buzz going for the Oscars, Patton came out in April. So that had more time to kind of, back then, I mean, movies like would play forever, right? Like a movie was popular, it'd be in theaters for like 9 months to a year. So I wonder if it came out almost too late in the year, but it did well at the Golden Globe. So what do I know? maybe that's not it. So there were only 2 films that year that got more than 1 win. Ryan's Daughter got 2. And Patton got 7. So Patton was the clear favorite of 1970. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of dive into the top 8 categories, talk about those a little bit more depth, but I will mention the winners of the other ones outside of maybe like the shorts. Best special visual effects went to Tora, Tora, Tora. So there weren't a lot of special effects movies back then. This is like, I mean, is there a lot of special effects in that movie? I mean, I watched it a few months ago. I don't remember thinking, wow, visual effects, stunning. Maybe, maybe there's some work I didn't notice that just happened to be special effects. The only other nomination was Patton. Patton for visual effects. Can anyone explain that to me?
I don't really know about that.
Just like war explosions, I guess, if that's,
like the actual physical explosions on site are considered visual effects. Okay. Best film editing went to Patton. Sure. I mean, how long is Patton? Almost 3 hours long?
3,
Yeah, 3 hours, right? It could have been longer. They awarded it for, keeping it tight. Best cinematography is a great win, and that's Ryan's Daughter. Looks absolutely gorgeous from beginning to end. Just, I mean, so many scenes like on the beach and in the forest, and it just looks incredible. I mean, it's a movie that should have been about 90 minutes, but it looks great. So I'm all for that win for sure. Best art direction went to Patton as well. Great. Sounds good to me. Best costume design, Patton wasn't even nominated. That's kind of interesting. And it went to a film called Cromwell, which I think I looked at clips from like 6 months ago. I don't think I wasn't on board with watching the whole thing. But that one, best costume design, beating out Airport, Darling Lily, The Hawaiians, and Scrooge. Oh, the costume design in Scrooge is great. I don't know why that didn't win. Best foreign language film went to Investigation of a Citizen Above Suspicion, the most awkward title of a 1970 film, for sure. I did watch that film. An episode of it will have just dropped. Not my favorite. Have either of you heard of that film or seen that film? It's on the Criterion collection.
Okay.
I have not seen it.
It's really strange. It's like, it's one of those movies that you're like, how did this get an Oscar? Like, there's nobody in it you recognize. Some interesting work, like camera work and things like that. It would go on to get nominated for something else like a year later. Like it didn't actually like premiere in the United States until 71. So at the 1972 Oscars, it got nominated for a couple things. So that's kind of interesting. So that's foreign language. One of the other nominees for foreign language I like much better is called Tristana, directed by Luis Buñuel. That's a really good film. Best sound went to Patton. Best song original for the picture went to For All We Know from Lovers and Other Strangers, which is a movie I only know because it's the film debut of Diane Keaton.
Wow.
It was a hard one to track down. I tried to watch it. I think I found like kind of a really bad version somewhere on YouTube or something. I watched some clips from it. Let's see. Best original song score went to Let It Be, a documentary. Music and lyrics by the Beatles. So does that mean the Beatles have an Oscar? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that was, I think, like looking at the nominees and winners, the moment where I thought, okay, this is like the craziest thing that maybe happened at the ceremony that I had no idea about before researching for this episode.
Okay, well, why is that? There's a best original score category that went to Love Story, the only win for Love Story, actually. And then there's best song, and then there's best original song score. Why do we have 3? Any idea?
They played with categories a lot
Yeah.
throughout history. And I think, I have no idea why. I think there are different names for different categories in sound as well.
Yeah. Like, why stop at 3? Let's have 15 of them.
Yeah.
Best lyric.
Yeah. I wonder too if it does have to do with just back then. I think, yeah, we're coming into the 70s, but before
Mhm.
then, musicals were such a huge
Huge.
deal
Yeah, yeah.
and
Mhm.
big money makers a lot of times. So I wonder if they just were looking for creative ways to separate those score and song categories. But that was a category that I was unfamiliar with.
Yeah, it's strangely worded too. Song score. It's like were the Beatles like in the back room with Robert Wise like with some $100 bills like, hey, add one more song category, and then we can get it. All right, so we're almost to the top eight. The last one, best documentary feature, of course, went to Woodstock. I have not heard of the other nominees for 1970, but Woodstock, super famous film. Martin Scorsese worked on it with his longtime editor. There's a lot of great talent behind that documentary and really important film for that time period. So glad to see it get best documentary. Have either of you seen Woodstock?
I have not, but I've always wanted to. So it's on my
Yeah.
list.
Yeah, it's worth a look. It's an easy watch. A lot of music, a lot of interesting kind of behind the scenes of like short interviews with people at the at Woodstock. It's really fun. It's long. I split it up into two. I watched the first 90 minutes and the other 90 minutes a different day. I split it up in two, but it was really interesting. Yeah. All right.
I
So
will add
yeah.
one of the honorary awards for the ceremony. They had a few, but one of them went to Orson Welles.
Oh, right. I did. Yeah, I forgot to say
Mhm.
the honorary award. So Orson Welles
Mhm.
won the big honorary award. Was he there at the ceremony?
No. So did either of you watch this video? It is nuts at the Oscars of seeing him. So he wasn't there, but they
Okay.
kind of cut to him. He's
Okay.
off making another film. I don't remember which one, but the person who introduces the award goes off, I think, especially since now people are watching Mank and talking about
Hmm.
Mank, and he talks about Citizen Kane and how Orson Welles won half an Oscar for the screenplay.
Yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
So it was crazy. So definitely recommend just like watching that speech from the Oscars because it's nuts.
And so is it like a pre-recorded speech like he did like days, weeks before the ceremony kind of a thing?
Yeah, it
Okay.
seems like it. They cut to him accepting the award and giving the speech for it.
Yeah, because that was an interesting part of the film, Mank, is that neither one of them was at the ceremony when Citizen Kane won Best Screenplay. So he finally got to be on the Oscar stage in a way, many years later. What are the other? Were there two more, Nick, that won honorary
So
awards?
the other honorary award went to Lillian Gish.
Oh, okay. Silent screen actress,
Mhm.
long career for her, right?
And then the John Herschel Humanitarian Award went to Frank Sinatra,
Why?
which was big. I forget who whoever had presented for him. Do you know, Sophia?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
But they said like, oh, Frank's been doing a lot of volunteer work and you're finally going to be recognized for it, which I had no idea.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Nice.
Oh, it was Gregory Peck was the presenter
Oh, okay.
Okay.
for
So
Frank
so they
Sinatra.
they were friends, like they knew each other, Gregory Peck and Frank Sinatra.
Was he the president of the Academy at the time?
Maybe. I feel
I can't
Peck. I
remember.
feel like Peck
I know
was
Gregory Peck
involved. Yeah.
was at some point, but I can't remember when.
Mhm.
But yeah.
He got his Oscar for To Kill a Mockingbird, and then he was like, "I want to be on the board now. Sign me up." All right, so that takes
And
us to our. Oh yeah, go ahead.
and then the
There's more.
the
There's
the
more.
final award. I know there's so many, but the Irving G. Thalberg
Okay.
Award Memorial Award went to Ingmar Bergman.
Oh wow,
Oh,
that's a
Some
crazy
big
lineup.
names, yeah.
Yeah.
It's-
Did he show up to the ceremony? I wonder. Bergman.
I
Or did-
have a hunch he didn't, but maybe I'm being cynical. I don't.
He called in from wherever he was. Thank you
Yeah.
very much. He pulled it down for Hitchcock. Thank you. Walks off. Have you seen that video of Hitchcock finally winning an Oscar? Thank you. Walked like
that's
leaves.
great.
He had a lot to say that night. All right, so let's go to screenplay of 1970, which this is the most awkwardly worded way to say original screenplay. Best story and screenplay based on factual material or material not previously published or produced. What the hell is happening here? So that went to, of course, Patton. The other nominees were My Night at Maud's, Love Story, Joe, and Five Easy Pieces. I'm kind of surprised. I feel like Five Easy Pieces should have won this. I feel like that's just a strong script. Like, who watches Patton and says the screenplay here is just extraordinary. So that's kind of interesting to me.
Well, so I mean, this was Patton had been written partly by Francis Ford Coppola when he was 26, which is crazy.
26. Wow.
So young. And this was before The Godfather, and just incredible that's what that would lead to.
I listened to the commentary on Patton when I got the Blu-ray a few months ago, and Coppola does the commentary, and he talks about how one of the reasons he was not fired from The Godfather was that very early on in that process, he won the Oscar for Patton for screenplay, and that gave him a little bit of clout for a few months. And so he thinks that part of the reason why he got to stay on as director of The Godfather was this Oscar win. So that was important too.
Yeah. Well, then we love this Oscar win, if that's what that means.
Yeah. Adrian Joyce wrote the script to Five Easy Pieces. Now it says here, screenplay by Adrian Joyce, story by Bob Rafelson, the director of Five Easy Pieces, and Adrian Joyce. So I'm assuming if that had won, both of them, right, would have gotten an Oscar, even though only she wrote the screenplay. Kind of interesting. I want to say, is that still the case today? I want to say Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Wasn't that mostly written by Charlie Kaufman, but then two other people were on stage with him accepting that Oscar, who were just like involved maybe in the story? Is that still a thing today? I can't remember.
I'm sure it is. I feel like it just really depends on like how the studio and how the film wants to like determine credit and who will go up there for the Oscar. I always am curious that with that too, with Best Picture, of how many producers, when you're looking at the credits, will end up actually getting the Oscar, but it usually is like 2 or 3 that'll end up getting it.
The Shakespeare in Love year, that when Harvey Weinstein's up there accepting, right? When we had 5. I think we had 5. Yeah. Wow. We had 5 people up there accepting for Shakespeare in Love, and I think after that year, that's when it went to 3 or fewer. Yeah, usually we get fewer bodies up on the stage, right? But yeah, I think if you had a significant part in the screenplay, you should be up there. If you sat with the screenwriter for a couple nights and gave them some ideas, and then they spent 6 months writing a screenplay, they should be on the stage.
Yeah. I think it comes down to the rules. I think once they changed the sound categories this year, I looked a little bit deeper at the Academy's rules, and that they could have up to 3 people nominated per section, and it gets very confusing. But I'm assuming writing is similar, and taking it back to Mank again with Orson Welles and Mankiewicz, and how it was rumored that Welles had put Mank first, and having multiple people there, I'm sure it relates to multiple categories.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this was between Patton and Five Easy Pieces. My Night at Maud's I watched a long time ago. I want to say in 2019 I watched that one. I can't remember that one very well, but I mean, Love Story.
I love that one.
My Night at Maud's. I need to look at it.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite Rohmer films. It's in his. If you have the 6 Moral Tales, that Criterion, if you've seen it, it's one of them in there, and it is really good. It's interesting because it is. I think it's a 1969.
Yeah, I think I watched it a long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but it goes into that American versus French release schedule.
Yeah. So it came out in the United States sometime in 1970, because I think on IMDb it lists it as 1969. Yeah. And then Joe is a really weird movie. It's Susan Sarandon's film debut. Her very first movie has like a really violent, like downer ending. That got a nomination for screenplay. Who would have thought? So Patton wins that. Francis Ford Coppola has to share it with Edmund H. North. Don't know the other name as well as Coppola. I don't know about the two of you, but good on you. Good on you, Edmund North, for that award. And then best screenplay based on material from another medium, best adapted. Our nominees are Women in Love, Lovers and Other Strangers, I Never Sang for My Father, Airport, and MASH. Our winner is MASH. Thank God they didn't give it to Airport.
Mm-hmm. This is a good call.
Good call. And MASH, I don't know if either of you know, like it opened in January of 1970.
Wow.
Wow.
January of 1970 gets nominated for picture and director and wins screenplay. And I mean, that's pretty crazy. You don't see that very much these days. Maybe this coming, maybe this April we'll see it. But what's interesting too is that Robert Altman had a second film released in 1970 at the very end of the year called Brewster McCloud. That movie was just completely passed over for the more successful MASH, which came out very early in that year. Great script, great cast. I mean, I think it's tricky, right? You can write the greatest script of all time, but if you don't have the cast to really deliver it, doesn't come to life. But he got a great group of actors for MASH, and really, really do a fantastic job with this screenplay, I think. It went to Ring Lardner Jr., based on the novel by Richard Hooker. And we actually talked about Brewster McCloud on the podcast. Oftentimes, Robert Altman will throw out his scripts for a lot of the films of the 70s, and he'll just kind of like improvise with the actors, and they'll have just like a very strict little outline of like what's going to happen. I don't know if that was the case with MASH. I'm hoping it wasn't, since it won an Oscar for Best Screenplay. I don't know. Like, I mean, you both have watched it recently. Did you find MASH to be, super improvisational? I mean, I felt like there's a script behind what they're saying, right?
It feels like there is more of a script compared to other Altman films. It definitely has the freewheeling style that he employs a lot, but this one I know in particular, people really wanted to make it, but no director really wanted to touch it for a while. So studios had the book, but then they found Altman and it worked for him. So I'm assuming the screenplay was already kind of there and already set, and he just kind of did his thing with it. But it does feel, I think, less improvisational than his other films later in the 70s that we get.
Yeah, I'd agree. And this is very early in his career too. He'd only made a few films before that. Like, I think he wasn't quite the Altman that we knew yet. Like in '69, when he would have filmed it in '69. So yeah, I think there was a script here. I don't think it was toss the script in the fireplace. We can figure this out. It's like, no, have a script. It helps, right? So anything else on the screenplay categories? Nick, did you have anything else to add to those two categories?
No, but I'm interested to talk about the hate for Airport eventually.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it now since we're on Best Supporting Actress. Our nominees for Best Supporting Actress are Sally Kellerman for MASH, a great choice. Lee Grant, who is the best thing in The Landlord. She's fantastic in that film. The very first Hal Ashby movie. Let's see. Karen Black for 5 Easy Pieces, who I bet was pretty close because she's great in 5 Easy Pieces. And then we have two nominees from Airport. We have Maureen Stapleton and our winner, Helen Hayes for Airport. We had to award Airport something. How could we not, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about Airport. I had never seen this before. I'm a huge fan of Airplane, which I had known for a while was like kind of a spoof of these films. And, it wasn't until later I was like, oh, they did like sequels. There's like 3 sequels to Airport. But I'd never seen the first one until, early in 2020. And that was a rough couple hours. I don't know about the two of you. Talk about deadly, dull, the whole time. Did you like it more, Nick?
I did. I was fine with it. I didn't know it, it was the inspiration for Airplane.
Yeah.
It just kind of surprised me, one, that it was so long, but 2, that it took so long to get to an actual airplane scene.
Yeah.
There was so much exposition in the airport, and the thrill behind, oh, this guy's making a bomb and he's upset and suicidal, and didn't really understand what was going on. I feel like there were a ton of characters to cut between and see what was happening.
Yeah,
But
it's a great ensemble cast. I'm not knocking the
Mhm.
cast. This is a great cast. Yeah,
and I think the airplane scenes are done very well for the 70s. I mean, today we would have lots of CGI and explosions and
Yeah.
all of that and green screen, but I think with later on what happens, I won't spoil anything, but I was just kind of surprised, and having the cast, all of the oxygen masks fall down, and you have the priest slapping the one guy who's hysterical, which is very Airplane.
Yeah.
I don't know, I didn't hate it.
Okay, what do we, Sophia? How'd you do with this one?
So this was my least favorite of the 5 of when I watched the Best Picture nominees. It was like the first hour was like waiting at an airport. So if they wanted to make the experience like that, where you just are bored
Just like
out of your mind,
No.
and then it's just completely corny, and it just felt like very those 70s disaster movies that of course like Americans really loved, but it just, the payoff at the end, if there is one, just was not worth the wait
2
time
hours,
to get there.
Yeah, and it's not that I'm not against the disaster films of the 70s. I think the Poseidon Adventure is really fun. The Towering Inferno is really fun. This one doesn't have a lot of tension or suspense. I was expecting like at least the second hour to be like really like, not edgy. I mean, this is like what, a G-rated, PG-rated thriller kind of a thing. I just wanted more, and by the end of the movie, I'm like, I'd rather be watching Airplane.
Yes,
like so much more fun. Yeah. Airplane should have been nominated for Best Picture. Will never happen. A spoof like that. But I guess, if there was going to be a win for Airport, I guess Helen Hayes is not terrible. I mean, if we're gonna, if it's gonna win something, give it to, Helen Hayes for Best Supporting Actress. Okay, I'm not, totally against that. She was really good in the film with what she had to do.
I just feel like this is just such an annoying classic Academy win where you have like Karen Black, who's really good.
So good.
Really, really good. Should have won, but she's like this just young newcomer. And then you have Helen Hayes, like first lady of the theater. And she's playing kind of this silly performance that I did enjoy. Like it was an enjoyable part of the movie. She was maybe my favorite part, but I also think Maureen Stapleton had kind of more to her performance. It was a little like she was in, I don't know, like a Tennessee Williams play or something at some points, but like almost like she was in another project. But I did enjoy watching her too. And I think she had a lot of layers to her performance. But yeah, this is just classic Academy going with this like older woman who comes back, who has had this great career, but you have this Karen Black performance right there. And they didn't go for it.
Yeah, and she tied for the Golden Globe. She won a little something before this. Maureen Stapleton is always great. Whenever she pops up in a movie, like in Interiors is one I always think about. Like she's so great in that. Like especially in the 70s. Like and she's really great in Airport. It could have gone to her too. But yeah, my vote here easily would be Karen Black for 5 Easy Pieces. She makes that movie even better than it already is. I love her in that. Nick's staying quiet. Airport.
She is no. I'm not trying to say Helen was amazing or the number one, but I will say when I watch 5 Easy Pieces, there's a scene where Karen is in the car trying to like tease Jack Nicholson, and she's like saying this line repeatedly, and I was like, shut up, please. And finally Jack says it, and she's like, God, you're so mean. And it was like, oh my God, I was thinking it too.
Well, that's
so
why
maybe
I think
good
that's
acting,
why she's so great. She's so she's very annoying in 5 Easy, but she's really, you can tell that's a performance. She's not just playing herself. Like she's really coming up with something unique in that film. All right, so let's go to supporting actor, which we also had a long chat about in the Ryan's Daughter episode, because when I put on Ryan's Daughter, I thought, oh, one of the actors from this film won Best Supporting Actor. Let me try to guess who it is. I won't look. And the person I guessed was the winner was not the one who won, like the person who won the actual Oscar. It was a different supporting actor in the film. John Mills who plays like a deaf mute in Ryan's Daughter, doesn't have any dialogue. He's kind of in the background for most of the movie. He's kind of looking at things and seeing things, and then like a lot of the plot kind of depends on him being at the right place at the right time. He would win for this, which I will never quite understand. John Marley nominated for Love Story, another question mark, because I don't know about you. I thought Ray Milland had the stronger supporting performance in Love Story, a bigger arc, more screen time. His scene at the end, I think, is really strong. Like, why John Marley over Ray Milland? That was kind of confusing to me. Any thoughts on that?
It was equally as confusing to me. I was looking over this and really had no idea where that one came from.
I mean, he's fine. He plays her dad. But he's in the movie what, half as much as Milland. I mean, maybe Milland's just in it too much for that. Maybe they thought it was kind of in between supporting and lead. I don't know. But John Marley, I didn't think did anything really great in the movie. He's fine to get an Oscar nomination. Gene Hackman nominated for I Never Sang for My Father. I believe this is his second nomination after Bonnie and Clyde from 3 years before. Gene Hackman is the lead of I Never Sang for My Father in every way. we did one of my first episodes of the podcast was about that film. Really, really strong film. I really enjoyed it. But Gene Hackman's in almost every scene, and then the dad is in maybe 2/3 of the movie. So that was kind of interesting too. Chief Dan George, his one and only Oscar nomination for Little Big Man. Tremendous performance. Great performance in that film. He's in it just, here and there. Like he'll pop up every 30, 40 minutes. He's kind of Dustin Hoffman's adoptive father, Native American actor. Really great performance. I was glad to see that he got nominated. And then the last nomination was Richard S. Castellano for Lovers and Other Strangers. Don't know much about that one. So what do we think about Best Supporting Actor here? Any standouts? Any question marks that I might have had here?
I mean, my instinct really would have been Gene Hackman, just because he's so well known. And yes, it's category fraud, but sometimes that ends up working in the case of, Brad Pitt last year. Mm-hmm. So I think that would have been the surprise to me. One thing I'll add that was so funny when I was watching was that a young Maggie Smith is the presenter of this award, and she is so excited that John Mills wins. And I think it's probably a British thing, but I thought that was hilarious just seeing her so excited for him.
Yeah, I was not familiar with John Mills' career before watching Ryan's Daughter. Was he kind of like, maybe he had, a bigger career than I realized, because Maggie Smith is very excited to hand him his award in that clip. Or maybe they were just good friends. I don't know.
Maybe. Yeah. I didn't really know anything about his career either. So that's why I was kind of surprised by that. It was just a funny moment.
Yeah. But I'm assuming neither of you watched Ryan's Daughter, right? You don't have 17 hours to devote to Ryan's Daughter.
I could not.
Right? The director of Dr. Zhivago and Lawrence of Arabia. But in this one, he's telling a really quiet love story, on par with what should be 100 minutes, like Love Story, but it goes for 3.5 hours. And
I almost ventured, and
you were like, yeah. So, and this kind of stopped his career for a while. We talked about it on the podcast. A lot of film critics at the time were really upset at him for making this movie that long, including Pauline Kael, who confronted him at a awards party or something. And he didn't make a film for 14 years. He did one more in 84. Wow. So yeah, so be careful what you say to these directors. They're fragile. Right? So yeah, I would have probably gone with Chief Dan George, actually. I think of the 5, that was probably my favorite performance. It's very much a supporting performance. Gene Hackman, he would do all right for himself. He would win Best Lead Actor the following year for The French Connection, which I'm so excited to get to talk about that movie in a few months. Mm-hmm. That came out in 1971. But yeah, this is another one just like Helen Hayes. I'm not thrilled by the choice here. But they get better as we go on. All right, so Best Actress of 1970. Our nominees are Carrie Snodgrass again. That name's been come up a few times here, for Diary of a Mad Housewife, Sarah Miles, Ryan's daughter. No. Ally McGraw for Love Story. Jane Alexander for The Great White Hope. And the winner is Glenda Jackson for Women in Love. Have either of you seen Women in Love?
I tried and it wasn't working for me at the moment. It
Yep.
was a little dull.
I had the
But I
same
love
experience.
Glenda.
Yeah, Glenda Jackson, who would win a second one, right? Doesn't she win on like 73, 74? I think she has 2 for lead actress.
Yeah, she did
Great
win
presence
that year.
on film. Women in Love is another one. I think on IMDb it said 1969, so I watched it like a while back, thinking it was a 69 film, and then I was like, wait, she won Best Actress for 70? What's going on here? But yeah, she's really strong in the film. The movie itself wasn't quite landing for me, so I didn't make it all the way to the end. But she's solid in it.
Yeah, similar for me.
Similar for you. I would probably give it to Ally McGraw. I don't know what you guys think about Love Story. I didn't think it was like the greatest movie of 1970. I definitely enjoyed watching it. It's a really easy, fun watch. And I think the best part of it is just Ally McGraw is so natural on screen. She's so much fun to watch. I think Ryan O'Neal can be kind of stiff at times, but she's great. Like, I think she's a great presence. And we were shocked to learn, when I was doing my research for the Love Story episode, she didn't really act very much after Love Story. She did The Getaway in 72. And then there's like this long stretch where she didn't make any films. So she didn't like build on the success of Love Story in any way. Like, she just kind of did her own thing. And some people do that, and that's fine.
I do wonder, bringing back Robert Evans again,
Robert Evans.
She starts having her affair with Steve McQueen not long after this, if he maybe blackballed her a little bit, but who knows?
I didn't even think of that, right? Because her next film would be The Getaway with McQueen. They had an affair on the set of The Getaway. Is that how it
I believe
went down?
so. Yeah, I think that's how it started.
And then she's not in any other major films in the 70s. So yeah, I wonder if there was something going on behind the scenes there, which would be unfortunate. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I do think
really
though,
loved
like,
her
she
on
was my
screen.
pick. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Glenda is a huge theater actress as well. And I did see her on stage a couple of years ago in 3 Tall Women.
Oh, cool.
Which is a play with, now I forget. Laurie Metcalf is in it, which is really all that matters. And it was just an outstanding play. And Glenda's monologues just like jaw on the floor. Everybody was so good, but Glenda ended up winning for that performance too at the Tonys. And I'm not surprised. I mean, I'm happy that she won here for Women in Love.
Yeah, and as I said, she would get 2. So yeah, I mean, very few actresses have won 2.
Yeah. But I will say I did really love Ally's performance. It seemed very new and fresh. And I don't know if that was the case at the time, but I was like really drawn in by her performance, and especially in this movie, which I liked overall, as well as, my previous Airport. But this one kind of flew by for me. So
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Glenda Jackson, obviously deserving. Jane Alexander is also really strong in The Great White Hope with James Earl Jones. I really enjoyed her in that. That was her film debut. This was Ally McGraw's second feature film. She had been in one movie in 69, and then she did Love Story. So she was also brand new on the scene. That's probably why she didn't get it, right? Because she was brand new. And sometimes they think, oh, well, we can award her later. You get the occasional Jennifer Lawrence. Like, we'll give it to her at 22, 23. But like, usually it takes a while. Usually it's a Kate Winslet. Like, how many nominations do I need to get?
Yeah.
Like, two amazing performances in the same year. Okay, we'll give it to you, Kate, for, well, which one? The Reader. We'll give it to you for that. Sophia's like, I have nothing to say about this.
Yeah, The Reader is a tough one to win for, I would say.
Yeah. I really, I love Kate Winslet. She's in my top 5 actresses. I really thought Meryl Streep should have won for Doubt that year. I thought that was really Meryl Streep's year. It'd been a long time. So then she ends up winning for The Iron Lady, which is not, I don't think as good of a film as Doubt. I don't know. But, it's all, I just did a Sandra Bullock episode with a guest, and we talked about her win for The Blind Side, which I'm a huge fan of hers. And I'm like, how did you win
But the worst win of all time, maybe. Yeah, it's not great.
It's not good.
Yeah, I mean, I thought she was deserving for Gravity. I thought she was great in Gravity, but for The Blind Side, I mean, I was like a huge fan of hers at the time, and I walked out of the theater and I was like, people are saying she might get nominated for this. She's not getting nominated for that. And then she wins. Like, I think if The Blind Side had come out in 2008 or 2010, never would have happened.
No,
it was just a matter of the right timing, a year where there wasn't a clear favorite, you know. I love going back. I mean, you know, going back 50 years is tough, right? Because we weren't there and we don't really know all the behind the scenes. But, you know, looking at the last 20 years of Oscar history, there's so many things of like, if she had won this year, then 3 years later, it would have been someone else. And it kind of just keeps steamrolling, right? Like if Meryl Streep had won for Doubt, the next few years might have been kind of different, right? Viola Davis might have won for The Help. And then so it creates like this, like all these different timelines just based on like one win, which I find really interesting. You know, if Gene Hackman had won for I Never Sang for My Father, would he have won the following year for The French Connection? You know, might not have won for The French Connection. It all kind of like leads to the next few years, which I find interesting. Yeah. So that takes us to Best Actor. And this is where it says declined. Ryan O'Neal for Love Story, Jack Nicholson for Five Easy Pieces, James Earl Jones for The Great White Hope, Melvin Douglas for I Never Sang for My Father, and George C. Scott for Patton. The winner, of course, is George C. Scott. What a lineup. Great lineup of performances there. All five are very, very good. Would we say? Well, what's our favorite performance there? For those of you, those are the films you've seen.
For me, definitely Jack Nicholson.
Oh, by far.
Just incredible. I love Jack Nicholson. I think that here he just, right before this, he was kind of seen as this character actor. I read some reviews of Five Easy Pieces from the time, and everyone was just really struck by him and his kind of transformation into a more subtle performance. And I think here he's just so charismatic, and you can just see how he becomes a movie star.
Absolutely. This is not a big, loud Nicholson performance that we've come to maybe be used to later in his career. This is a quieter performance, and one that really shows his charisma. You're absolutely right. This is like the star-making performance for Nicholson in his career. Would you agree, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, I think Five Easy Pieces was like a follow-up to Easy Rider and this new Hollywood generation, really. I wasn't exactly, mind blown by it.
Yeah.
But
you weren't dancing down the hallway singing its praises. Five Easy.
But I think it's a fine movie. I think it really does focus on the acting,
and the characters.
Yeah, and Jack is definitely, he plays into it. The ending kind of threw me off, but
yeah, we can talk about the ending for sure. What's so interesting about Jack Nicholson's career is that, he was acting in films as early as 1959. He spent 10 years making films. He's got like more than 10, he's got like at least 15 titles on his filmography between 59 and 69. And he was kind of gearing up for a career in writing and directing. He was almost done with acting. And then an actor dropped out of Easy Rider. I want to say it was Rip Torn, maybe. And they needed someone last minute, and so they got Jack to come do it. He gets the only acting nomination for Easy Rider for 69. And then right after Easy Rider, like around that time, Bob Rafelson is like, I have this project. I think you'd be right for it, Jack. I think you should be the star. And then this just catapulted him in a way that he couldn't come back from. And it wasn't just overnight success. It took him 10 years to really find the right projects, the right directors, to kind of show on screen what he can do, which is really cool.
Wow. I mean, when I was watching this, I kept thinking, I mean, he did look really similar to The Shining, but that didn't come until 10 plus years afterwards, 1980. Right? So, I mean, he's had such a long career. I was going to ask what number nomination this was for him.
So number 2. So his first nomination was for Easy Rider.
Was the previous year.
The year before, that was for supporting actor. And then his second is for Five Easy Pieces. I believe I want to say he attended the ceremony every time he was nominated. There is a clip of him in the audience for Easy Rider, the Easy Rider nomination. And then he's there. Like, I think he might have the sunglasses on even back then. I don't know.
There was a comment about he didn't dress for the ceremony the first time, and they were like, "Okay, Jack, come on, you got to like dress up now for his second nomination."
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like going into this, most people, especially after Golden Globes, probably expected George C. Scott to win. I don't think Nicholson came into this like I'm the front runner.
No,
but I mean, I guess there could have been. I don't know. Could have been.
I also read in this book that Jack was like, "Oh, I'm going to vote for myself, but I know George is going to win." So I think at that point it was like very well known, kind of like a Renee Zellweger or Joaquin Phoenix moment. Yeah.
I believe after this, he's nominated for The Last Detail and Chinatown. And then on One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is the one he finally wins for for 75. So I believe it's like his fifth nomination in like 6-7 years. I mean, it's crazy. Just racking him up. I mean, what does he have total? 13 nominations, something like that? He's pretty high up there. It's like him and Katharine Hepburn and then Meryl Streep with her 86 nominations.
Yeah. Because I know he's won 3. But he has so many nominations.
He's won 3. His other wins were for Terms of Endearment and As Good as It Gets, which as good the love for As Good as It Gets, winning both for him and Helen Hunt. I'll never quite understand that.
I don't get that movie. I don't.
I think he was more deserving for About Schmidt. I think that's a better dramatic performance, but that was also a really tough year. You had Adrian Brody and Daniel Day-Lewis and Nicolas Cage. I mean, it was like a crazy good year for actors and performances. But Jack Nicholson, obviously a long celebrated career. One of my definitely top 5 favorite Nicholson performances would be Five Easy Pieces. I think he's really great in this. Ryan O'Neal, he does what he needs to do. Is he worthy of a Best Actor nomination for Love Story? I don't know if I'd go that far.
No. When I see Ryan O'Neal, I just can't help but think like, I want you to be Robert Redford, but you're not Robert Redford.
Robert Redford, who I believe also only has 1 nomination for acting, right? I believe it's The Sting. I believe Robert Redford only has 1 acting nomination at the Oscars, and that's for The Sting. And then, of course, he would win Best Director for Ordinary People. Yeah, but you'd think someone like Redford would have like 5 nominations for acting, but he only has 1.
Yeah, that's so surprising to me. I did not know that.
And then, I'd have to think about it. There's also, there's great actors who never got nominated for anything. I think Donald Sutherland, who's in MASH, who's in, I think, 5 films in 1970, still acting today. I just watched The Undoing. On HBO with Nicole Kidman, which he was really great in, and he's still working 50 years on. Never nominated for an Oscar. He just won like an honorary, right? Like I think he just won for that.
Yeah,
but isn't that crazy that Sutherland never got a nomination for an Oscar? I mean, he's in Klute. He's in so many great films.
I could talk about it all day. It's crazy to me. It really is, especially Ordinary People. But
he's so good in that too. Yeah. I don't know. Sometimes it just doesn't, whatever reason. Maybe he got close for nominations here and there, but just never worked out. James Earl Jones. This is also his only acting nomination. His only nomination for an Oscar is for The Great White Hope. Excellent performance. Great. Not a great film, but a great performance. And then Melvin Douglas is solid, and I Never Sang for My Father. It's a supporting performance. So this was a case where I think they just went with the more famous figure, the veteran. He gets lead. Hackman is newer. He gets supporting. I don't know how that came to be, but I'm glad Melvin Douglas was recognized because he also is very, very good in I Never Sang for My Father. Do we think George C. Scott is deserving of this award? He's obviously really great in Patton as well. It's a good performance. I don't know how you say no, no Patton, no George C. Scott shouldn't win. Nobody can really say negative things about this win. It's a great performance, right?
Yeah, I think that for Patton too, you have to have someone who just brings a lot of weight and complexity to that performance, and he does do a really good job in it. So it's,
Mhm.
yes, I prefer Nicholson in Five Easy Pieces because that's just the type of performance I usually go for. But I can't say no to George C. Scott here because I think he does. It is one of those examples too, where when you think of Patton, you think of George C. Scott. I think a lot of times too, when you think of George C. Scott, you think of Patton. So they're kind of intertwined there.
Yeah, absolutely. And he looks I watched the documentary on the Blu-ray. Like he looks very similar to the real person, which doesn't always happen, but that was a case where he looks very close. And I guess there were people like who knew the real guy who were on set or saw the film and were like, whoa, it's very close to the real person. So that's kind of cool too. You don't see that very often.
That's interesting because George C. Scott wasn't the first choice
Really?
to play
Really?
him either.
Who was the first choice? I don't think I know
there were 3 or 4, I think.
Okay.
And I think Robert Mitchum, but then also Burt Lancaster, who was in Airport.
Oh.
You know, he was on Airport, so he denied the role. And George C. Scott was like, okay, I'll do it. And yeah, you can't fight his performance. And, you know, it being 3 hours, I think it's probably something that helped him win, but he's, like Sophia said, just like really well known for this performance, especially.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's go to Best Director. Our winner was also for Patton, and that's Franklin J. Schaffner, the director of Planet of the Apes from 2 years before. So he was actually like approached to do the sequel Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which came out in the summer of 1970, but did Patton instead. Probably a good career choice. I think he made the right call there. Other nominations, Federico Fellini for Fellini's, I don't know how to say that, Satyricon, which is another one that says on IMDb 69, so it must have come out in the US in 70. Arthur Hiller for Love Story, Robert Altman for MASH, Ken Russell for Women in Love. Yeah, I think Robert Altman, would have been a really strong contender here. This was like his first real great film as director. Really big hit of 1970. I bet he was, in the running for sure. What do we think? Sophia, any thoughts on Best Director?
Yeah, I will always wave the flag for Robert Altman. I love him so much, especially Nashville is my favorite of his. But yes. I think this one is just so indicative of his style, of what's to come. I think that it is just almost, I can't really understand why they wouldn't split picture and director here. I know that they really used to not do that a lot. It would go to picture and director would go to the same movie, but here I really just think it should have been Altman.
Yeah. Yeah, and did Altman ever win Best Director? I don't think he ever won for Oscar, right? He won the Golden Globe for Gosford Park. I remember that was like a big deal when he won that.
Yeah.
But he didn't get the Oscar. That went to Ron Howard for A Beautiful Mind. I wanted David Lynch to win that year. That's another conversation.
Oh, me too. Yeah, that's another.
Yeah.
Altogether.
If they were going to go with a crazy pick at the Golden Globes, like I felt like Lynch had a shot for Mulholland Drive, but they went with Robert Altman. So yeah, I mean, Franklin J. Schaffner, excellent choice for Patton. I don't know what he would go on to make after Patton. I should have looked him up before our conversation. But he probably made some strong films in the rest of the 70s, and definitely one of his most famous movies for sure would be Patton from 1970. Any thoughts on director, Nick? We haven't talked about.
I think these are just great names.
Yeah.
I think we've seen Fellini in there a few times, and the Academy must really love him. He's probably one of the best of all time.
Yeah.
I can't really vouch for Altman much, as Sophia knows. It's rough for me.
A rough go.
Yeah, I think if Patton hadn't won as many awards as it did, it would have just been a showcase piece for George C. Scott. So
yeah.
But it had the support. And
yeah, it could have gone the way of like, let's just reward George C. Scott, but movie, they could have, I mean, this could have been close. It could have been a love story, picture, director, actor. I mean, they could have gone crazy with love stories. So I'm glad they pulled that back a little bit. by the time of the, I feel like if this ceremony had been on February 9th, it might have gone to Love Story. I mean, who knows? But I feel like enough time had passed. Like, okay, maybe let's go with the stronger dramatic film in Patton here. You mentioned Fellini. Have either of you watched that video of Steven Spielberg waiting to get his Best Director Oscar nomination for Jaws? It's on YouTube. Like someone was filming him as they were announcing the nominations for the 75 films, and he's like waiting to get his nomination for Jaws, but he didn't get it, and he goes, "Oh, yeah, they gave it to Fellini."
I remember that. That's where it came from. I was like, what is this memory I have? And it was that, because we had talked about it about 1975. Yeah.
So yeah, I guess Fellini was kind of the go-to fifth nomination, right? Even if the movie wasn't nominated, acting, if you see Fellini on the Fellini number 5.
Yeah. Right. And 1975, when we talked about that with Fellini and Spielberg, right? Spielberg being this young 27-year-old, and then you have Fellini with, I believe it was Amarcord that year.
Okay, yeah.
And but it was from a previous year too, like this thing we've been seeing with these foreign language films. Yeah. And Fellini got in there. So
yeah. Well, Spielberg, he would do okay. I don't think he's crying about his lack of a director nomination for Jaws. He got over it. All right, so that takes us to Best Picture. Are you upset, Nick, that the director of Airport was not nominated for Best Director? This is a sin. Nick was finishing Airport. Why didn't the director get nominated? What the hell? If Nick had a time machine, he would go back and talk to the voters. Come on, director too. Come on. But no, Airport did get in for picture, along with Five Easy Pieces, Love Story, MASH, and the winner, which is Patton. What do we think of Best Picture, Sophia?
I think that Patton makes a lot of sense. I think that especially in a year with 2 war films nominated for Best Picture, MASH is the more unconventional one that kind of leads into where we go with these unexpected war films. But Patton is really that type of epic film that Academy voters love to reward. It has an excellent performance at the forefront. I think Francis Ford Coppola, I always assume that the writing is because of him and not North, and maybe that's unfair, but I think he adds a lot of complexity to the script, and it makes it, even though I personally like MASH more, it makes it a war film that is different enough for Academy voters to go for. So I think it makes a lot of sense, even though it wouldn't have necessarily been my vote if I was an Academy voter back then.
Okay. Yeah, those are all good points. What about you, Nick? Do you feel good about the Patton?
And using that word again, epic, I think, it's this Lawrence of Arabia, Ben-Hur moment for this film and George C. Scott and everything that they do. I think it seems pretty easy thinking back in terms of like history and these nominees. It's like, okay, which one are we going to remember most? And I feel like MASH is next, would have been number 2. It's interesting that Patton won 4 out of the Big 5 awards this year, and the next time this would happen would be with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in 75. So that's kind of like a big
just no Best Actress. Why wasn't there a great leading role for a woman in Patton? Come on, Francis Ford
was
Coppola.
not achieved. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is the case where we have 2 movies looking forward, and that's MASH and Five Easy Pieces. Those to me feel like 70s movies. And then you have 2 movies looking back, and that's Airport and Love Story, I would say. Love Story, we talked about on the podcast. I really enjoyed it. It's on my top 10 of the year, but it felt like kind of like a 66, 67. Didn't feel like this is necessarily like a 70s movie. And then Airport is very, 1955.
Yeah, it's very old. Yeah,
kind of felt, and then Patton's right in the middle. Patton feels like it's of its time. It's a little bit old fashioned with the epic kind of feel to it. But I mean, watching it again, I hadn't seen it since I was like in high school. And, it feels like a 1970 film. Like it has like the feel of like this time, and it's just a great movie all around. It's a solid choice. I feel like Yeah, I think MASH might have been the only other one that had maybe a shot at this. I think Love Story might have had a shot, but I think that would have not been looked at, through kind eyes the last 50 years. Love Story beats MASH and Patton. That would have been kind of weird. So yeah, I don't think that was going to happen. I think Patton was like the clear favorite here. Yeah.
And I think it's
go ahead.
crazy that Five Easy Pieces is the only Best Picture nominee that didn't win any awards this year.
Yeah,
But
right.
all four other nominees have won.
Yeah, so Airport gets supporting actress, Love Story gets score, MASH gets screenplay, Five Easy Pieces. Yeah, I mean, I think Five Easy Pieces, the win should have been Karen Black, or even Jack Nicholson too, but that would have been hard to beat George C. Scott. But yeah, that's a good point. Five Easy Pieces, definitely one of the most beloved films of 1970, did not get any wins, which is unfortunate. Yeah.
And also noted that I think going back to your top box office of the year, Five Easy Pieces was also the only one not in the top 5.
Yeah, you're right. Let's see. Yeah. Five Easy Pieces, I think it did pretty well.
I think it was like 14 or something.
14?
It was close, but it wasn't, in that top tier.
Yeah, I was also surprised to not see, kind of the big summer sequel release was Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which I just mentioned a few minutes ago, and that is also not on the top 10. Kind of interesting that like films like MASH and Love Story and Patton are the top films of the year. So that's usually there's a few films nominated for Best Picture that are very low on the list, especially today, right? With all the blockbusters and stuff, it's hard to get some of those films in the top 10 of the year. It's pretty rare when that happens now. Yeah. So anything else? Yeah. Anything else we want to say about the Oscar ceremony celebrating the films of 1970 that we didn't touch on? I feel like we kind of hit on everything, right? Including Nick's love for Airport.
Yeah. I love that Nick loves Airport and doesn't like MASH. It is just such a funny thing to me.
Yeah, no, I did. When I sat down to watch that, I was kind of excited. I was like, oh, this will be fun. Great cast. And it was about like 45-minute mark. I was like, oh my God, this is rough. So I'm glad one of us got some enjoyment out of Airport. Nick's, after we're done here, he's going to watch the 3 sequels back to back. It's going to be good.
I was so surprised to see how many sequels there were. That's crazy.
Yeah, they're so awkwardly titled. It's like Airport 1975, which actually I kind of want to watch because it's the final screen performance by Gloria Swanson from Sunset Boulevard is in it. I think playing herself. Wow. So that's kind of interesting. But yeah, the last one's like The Concorde, Airport 79. That's a year before Airplane. I think Airplane came at the right time. We needed to spoof this genre for sure. All right, so the last thing I have today before we wrap things up is my top 10 list of 1970. Do either of you have, if you don't have a top 10, like, a couple favorites you might want to talk about? Nick?
So Sophia, I'm going to defer to Sophia for this one.
So
what are your favorites of the year?
I think my favorites, so of this list for sure, of just looking at the Academy Award nominees, because I didn't look at the entire box office list, but I will say I do really like MASH. I think it's interesting watching it. So I was familiar with the TV show before the movie. And I think it's funny to think about, people then seeing the movie before the TV show and how different they are. But I think watching it in 2020, there are definitely pieces of it that are troubling and challenging to watch. Some of the humor that's in there, but I was just, I think, really impressed by how well directed it was, the entire troupe of actors that were in the movie. And I think it's a very interesting portrait of war, considering it's supposed to be in Korea, but it feels very Vietnam, very contemporary, which I think is a very key thing for Altman, is to always just be moving film forward. And I'll also say I really did like Five Easy Pieces. It felt like this kind of indie hit of the, even though it didn't win any Oscars, I like that it was just this kind of Sundance feeling film in this group. So I would say those two of the year would be my favorites. I'm sure you're going to mention some more that I'm forgetting.
Yeah, no, I have a few on my list that weren't nominated for anything too. So hopefully have some
Yeah.
surprises for listeners. What about you, Nick? What were your your favorites? I'm scared to ask.
I mean, if I say airport is my number one, what are you gonna kick me off?
No, you can stay. You can love airport. Go for it. You only live once.
Yeah. I mean, I think Patton is up there
Yeah.
too. Again, a lot of these movies we've discussed I hadn't even heard about before, so I have a lot of homework to do. And I think I have more desire to see a lot of these as
Mhm.
well. Do you feel like the Academy summed up the year pretty well, considering that you've done, a lot of these films and a lot of the 70s over the past year on the podcast?
Yeah, and I haven't said this yet. I mean, there's a lot of films that I watched that were very rough that I didn't make it to the end, that I never talked about on the podcast. Because anytime starting in January, if there was a Turner Classics movie, if there was a film on TCM that was released in 1970, I would record it and watch it. And there were a bunch that I watched like a half hour, and I'm like, no. So it's not to say that because the 70s are like my favorite decade for movies, like, oh, every movie released in 1970 is just brilliant. And there's a lot of clunkers too. There were some hours I spent going, okay, why am I watching this? And most of the films on my list are a part of the ceremony, but some of them are not. And I have a couple you probably haven't heard of. One I didn't even do a podcast episode for because the film came out back in the summer. So let me, as I said before, I watched about 70 to 75 films from 1970. These were my favorites. Number 10, Loving, starring George Segal and Eva Marie Saint, came out very early in 1970. A very different kind of love story than Love Story, about divorce and kind of how it affects their family life and his work life, and really kind of quiet film. George Segal had a big year in 1970. He was also in The Owl and the Pussycat. And maybe my pick for the worst film of 1970 that I watched, and that's Where's Papa? So if you want to go find that episode, that was a fun one to record. Not a great film to have to sit through. This by far was his best film of the three, and that's Loving, which came out, I believe, in March of 1970. My number 9 pick is probably the most obscure, and that's one I just watched last night. And that is called Something for Everyone, starring Angela Lansbury and Michael York. LGBTQ main character, and Michael York. He's very young and dashing, and he's flirting, romancing with an older Angela Lansbury. This is the year before Bed Knobs and Broomsticks that she did for Disney. And then there's also this guy who works on her estate who's very handsome, and he has like an affair with the younger man. And it's just like this. It looks beautiful. The story moves along in a way that kind of surprises you. The ending's it's got like a funny final scene that leaves you wondering what's going to happen to all the characters. It was kind of hard to find. It took me a while to find a copy of it online, but it's called Something for Everyone. 1970, it's kind of hard to find films with LGBTQ content. Here's one that I was able to track down, along with my number 8 choice, which is The Boys in the Band from 1970 by William Friedkin. The first feature film primarily about the lives of gay men, which came out in, I believe, March of 1970. It always kind of strikes me as odd that William Friedkin would direct that film, since he would go on the next year to do The French Connection and The Exorcist and do a lot of like action films, that he does kind of this smaller kind of ensemble film based on a play. Have you seen that one, Nick? It's a really good film. I mean, I watched both again for the new one, just hit Netflix in September. I prefer the 1970 version. I think that one was better.
So this is the original?
The original, yeah. So it was first a play in the 60s, and then it became a film in 1970, and then they remade it as a film for 2020 with a much more star-studded cast.
Yeah, I was going to ask when the play was written, because I did see the play on Broadway a few years ago, and then the film that had included the entire cast from the performance, and I think Sophia has seen it as well.
Oh, cool! I would love to see that on stage. That'd be fun. Yeah.
But I would like to see this original one to see
Yeah,
what
because I'm,
changes or
yeah, I feel like today's audiences, younger audiences, are just gonna watch the new one on Netflix and that'll be it. But
Mhm.
like, go track down the 1970 original. It's really, really good.
Okay.
Um, my number 7 is Little Big Man with Dustin Hoffman, Faye Dunaway, Chief Dan George. It's got like it's kind of a sweeping epic film. It takes place over 100 years of this guy's life, and just a really entertaining movie. I really, really enjoyed it. That episode just dropped recently on the podcast, so check that out. Um, Monty Walsh, number 6, not nominated for anything, didn't make a dent at the box office. Really great Western from, believe it came out in October of 1970. Kind of a quieter film. It feels very much like a 70s Western, not a 50s or a 60s. It's not a shoot 'em up. There's no real violence at all until the last 15 minutes. It's a quieter kind of character study with Lee Marvin and Jack Palance. It's a really, really good movie. I'd recommend that. And then the top 5 are a lot of the Oscar films. My number 5 would be Love Story. Number 4 would be MASH. Number 3 would be Patton. 3 great movies. I think well deserving of their nominations and their wins. You guys might laugh at my number 2 choice, but I loved it. I had never seen it before until this fall. And I'm a huge Christmas story. I'm a huge Christmas Carol fan, and that's the movie Scrooge with Albert Finney, a musical I had never seen. I mean, outside of what Muppet Christmas Carol with Muppet Christmas Carol with Michael Caine is fun. That's the one I kind of grew up with in the early 90s. But most of the adaptations are straightforward, narratives without songs. And I really enjoyed the story being told through a musical with the great Albert Finney in the lead role. I had an absolute blast with that movie. So my number 2 choice for 1970 would be Scrooge. And then, of course,
I need to watch that.
Yeah, if you haven't seen it, it currently has a copy on YouTube, has an HD quality version of the movie. You can just watch it on YouTube, and it looks great. Amazing cast. The songs are really memorable. It's not one of those musicals where you're like, okay, stop with the singing, tell the story. Maybe because we're all so familiar with that story, right? We can just kind of go with it. But the songs in it are great. And the last 20 minutes of Scrooge is just like a full-on song and dance that is unbelievable. The ending to this movie is striking to me. And it kind of amazes me that Albert Finney was not nominated for Best Actor, that the film didn't get nominated for Picture. Like, I think it's worthy. And I don't think the audience it was a weird time for musicals in 1970, right? Like Sound of Music was kind of like the last big one in 65. And then for about 5 years, they were getting less and less popular. By 1970, you don't see a lot of musicals. Julie Andrews is in one called Darling Lily for 1970. That was also not very successful. So people just weren't big on musicals at the time. I think if Scrooge had come out 2-3 years before, it might have done much better. I don't know. Because Oliver won Best Picture 2 years before in 68. So that was a musical that did really well. But yeah, I would recommend Scrooge if you're a fan of A Christmas Carol, if you like those 175 adaptations, however many they've done, check out Scrooge with Albert Finney. And then my number 1 film of the year, easiest choice. If I had to only take one film from that year, and that's the only one I can have for the rest of time, that would be 5 Easy Pieces with Jack Nicholson. Absolutely loved it. I'd seen it a few times before. I saw it in high school. I think I saw it in college. I hadn't seen it in a few years. I got the Blu-ray Criterion, which has like a great behind the scenes and commentary and so much interesting information about the movie. That even helped my interest and love for that movie grow even more. It's such a fantastic story and lead performance by Nicholson, and it's so watchable. It's just so much fun to watch. Karen Black is like astounding in it. This would be her only nomination in her long career. I think this is probably her best role in her career, and she just knocks that one out of the park. And yeah, I just love everything about 5 Easy Pieces. I think it's very much a film of the 70s. Here's the kickoff film for the rest of the decade, I think. 5 Easy Pieces, for sure.
I will say I did love the diner scene from that movie.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, we talked about the diner scene for a while because that's the most famous scene from the movie. Mm-hmm. If you take that scene out, nothing changes about the story.
No,
which
it means
yeah.
absolutely nothing. And the fact that, they're with these hitchhikers and this happens, but it's still like, wow, he did that, which was, yeah, I really like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have not seen Five Easy Pieces, if you have any homework for the year in film of 1970, check out Five Easy Pieces for sure. So yeah, that's the wrap up of 1970. I'm so excited. I got to do it with Sophia and Nick. It's been a thrill for me. I love your podcast, Oscar Wilde, to talk about the Oscars with the two of you and talk about the films of 1970. Very excited. Starting next week and on for the rest of 2021, we are looking at the films of 1971. So yeah, this has been a huge thrill, a lot of fun. If the two of you just want to plug your podcast a little bit and tell us where our listeners can find you online, that would be fantastic. It's Sophia. You want to start?
Yeah. So we have a podcast that we just started this year. Very exciting. You can find us, Oscar Wilde, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. If you love our show, please rate and review us. You can also find us on social media. So Twitter and Instagram at Oscar Wilde Pod. We always try to keep it entertaining on Instagram with fun polls and things like that. So thank you, Brian, for plugging our pod and for listening along. We love your pod as well.
Oh, thank you so much. It means a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Nick, if you have anything to add to that.
Not really. It's been a fun year.
Yeah,
we're always looking for suggestions into, what you want to hear as listeners. So, yeah, definitely give us a shout out, go on social media, and we have some exciting ones planned for the next few weeks and months and, into award season, trying to push that along until April. But thank you so much for having us. And I'm excited looking into 1971.
Yeah, there's some good ones coming up. I mean, there's George Lucas's first movie, THX 1138. There's Clute, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. My favorite children's film is coming up in June. And then November, December of 71 is insane. I mean, you got The Last Picture Show and Duel and Bedknobs and Broomsticks and Harold and Maude. So many great films coming up. Very excited to talk about. So yeah, I would love to have the two of you back to talk about a film or talk about more Oscar ceremonies. Can't wait to follow your podcast talking about, the ceremony to come here coming up in April of 2021. Be very curious to see how that all pans out. So thank you both for being here. And thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us on the web at filmat50.com, all the socials. You can email us at 50yearsagoinfilm@gmail.com. And also check out our Patreon page, which has at least 2 new episodes a month. So check that out. Support the podcast. Until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.